In nearly everybody's career, you'll find yourself working for a toxic boss at some point in time or another. But working for a toxic boss can torpedo your career, and everybody's first reaction is to just quit and move on to greener pastures. But that's not always the best answer. So in this video, let's share some strategies on how you can deal with a toxic boss. Hey everybody, it's Brian from A Life After Layoff, and today I want to share with you some strategies on how to deal with that toxic boss that you might find yourself working for. Now, inevitably, especially as you get further into your career, it's probably a statistic likelihood that you will work for a bad boss at some point in time or another. I certainly have in my career, and there are certain strategies that I've learned to adopt in order to deal with these more effectively. So in this video, I want to share with you some of the strategies I've personally used and also coached people on how to navigate a toxic situation, specifically with that boss. But before we get into that, I actually have a newsletter that teaches you how to reclaim control and start to approach your job search and your career with more authority and conviction. And if you're ready to power up your career, check it out. It's completely free and it's loaded with value. So I think the first step in dealing with a toxic boss is indeed making sure that you're working for a toxic boss. And listen, it's easy to label everybody around you, every boss you've ever had, and every company you've ever worked for as toxic. But the reality is that's just not the truth. And in some cases, maybe the boss you're working for isn't truly toxic. Then maybe you start the most effective leader. I actually made another video on some of the surefire signs that you're working for a toxic boss. So you might want to check that one out first. But some of the things that I look for are micromanaging. If they are a narcissist, and narcissist is kind of a broad term and it's kind of used pretty loosely. We'll probably dive into that in a future video. A lack of communication or leaving you out of communication loops on purpose. And this might be trying to have one-on-one meetings, like a regular one-on-one sync, and they're always rescheduling or never making time for you. And inevitably, the toxic boss will always find fault in you of not communicating enough with them, even though they're the root cause of it. And of course, bullying, favoritism, intimidating tactics, and other things like undermining your credibility in public, especially behind closed doors to key decision makers, reprimanding you in public, or doing shady things with your paychecks or cutting your bonus and things like that. So in particular, you want to look around your workplace, see how your boss is interacting with not just you, but also other people in your department. If they're consistently treating everybody like crap, then chances are you probably do work for a very toxic boss. But if it's just you that is being treated this way, there might be a deeper reason behind it. So assuming that you are indeed dealing with a toxic workplace, the first thing that you really want to do is make sure that you maintain professionalism. Because even if they're not professional with you, you don't want to stoop to their level. You will certainly not come out on top if you're trying to go head to head with an unprofessional boss. The best thing you can do here, even though it might be difficult because you have to bite your tongue, is to maintain the professionalism, take the high road, double down on your performance, make sure you're meeting all of your commitments, and truly don't give them any reason to criticize you. And I've actually personally seen certain bosses who are particularly toxic get dismissed or encouraged to move on as their behavior became less and less accepted in the workplace. Now, I know a lot of you are going to be thinking, yeah, right, that never happens, but it actually does happen if you work in a good company with good senior leadership. But the next thing you want to do is you want to establish boundaries and let your boss know that you're not going to tolerate the bad behavior. And listen, sometimes establishing boundaries, especially with a toxic boss, can be very uncomfortable, but you owe it to your own mental well-being and your career to establish some sort of boundary. And if that boss is stepping over the line, it'll give you a pretty clear indicator of what the next steps are for you. And setting these boundaries may require you to call them out in a professional way when they're overstepping the line. For example, if your boss has a bad habit of calling you late at night or over weekends, you should be firmly establishing a boundary with them. And I would say something to the effect of, it's really important for me to spend time with my friends and family on nights and weekends so that I can be fully recharged on Monday. And I'll be happy to sit down with you on Monday morning to look at my schedule together so we can reprioritize what's mission critical and how we can slot this in. And I realize by doing so, you're going to be pushing back fairly firmly, but you need to establish a clear boundary with your boss. Otherwise, you can continue to expect nights and weekend calls for the rest of your career at that employer. And the same strategy works for bosses who pile work onto you at the last minute, or maybe they ask you for something that is not reasonable at the close of business. Say the same thing. I'm happy to take on this additional project. I can fit it in next week. Let's sit down and look at my calendar together, and you can help me reprioritize what I can de-emphasize. So remember to clearly communicate and assert what the boundary is, but do it in a professional manner. This next tip is for self-preservation, and this is something that you should get into the habit of doing anyway, even if you're not working for a toxic boss. But in particular, when you are working for a toxic boss, you want to make sure that you're documenting everything. So recording any displayed demonstration of toxic behavior, you want to take a note of it, when it happened, what the date was, if there was any witnesses, and if you have any direct conversations with your boss and there's a commitment that comes out of it, you certainly want to document that, and you want to send them a follow-up email to make sure that they know exactly what you've committed to and what the timeline is for it. The deal here is that you're essentially managing upward. You want to let the boss know that you are taking your job very seriously. And if you find yourself behind closed doors with, say, a human resources rep, you want to make sure that you've got very detailed and concise notes, and this is essentially evidence that you would be using to support your cause. Because toxic bosses don't often like when people stand up to them. You just want to make sure that you've got that in your back pocket. Next thing you might want to do is seek out some support from trusted colleagues or mentors. Now, this one can be kind of sticky, so be careful here, because you don't want to go to a coworker the same level as you and start venting. Inevitably, the boss will end up finding out about it, and it could get you in even more hot water. But if there's a trusted mentor at that boss's level, or maybe even higher, you might want to go in and just ask them for their opinion on what's the best way to manage this difficult situation. Or if you want the safer route, find somebody outside of the organization that is at a more senior level that can give you some advice on how to handle this particular person. But again, just know that this does come with some risk, that your boss could end up finding out about it, and it could cause you some more grief. But at the end of the day, it might be worth having a senior ally on your side. Just hopefully they can keep the confidence. Another possible option, if you don't feel like you've got any close confidants or a trusted mentor in your organization, you could always tap into the employer's EAP program. In a lot of cases, the HR department will have a program called the EAP. Now, the EAP is anonymous. The Human Resources Department does not find out the details of why people are calling into it, and it might give you a chance to talk to somebody that's neutral, but it might be a little bit generic. And if the toxic behavior is particularly bad, and you're starting to notice that it's impacting your performance, in other words, boss is writing you up, boss is affecting your performance appraisals and things like that, then it might be worth having a closed door meeting with human resources. But I would only use this as a last resort if you feel like you've got no other options and the boss is targeting you for quiet firing. And if you're not sure what quiet firing is, I actually made another video about that as well. I'll leave a link at the very end of this video. You can check that one out too. But just know that going to HR will be a very big escalation, and know that your boss will be aware of it because the HR department will likely be conducting an investigation. So in other words, they'll probably call the boss into the office with a list of these questions. They'll start to ask them, did you do this? Did you say that? They might ask other witnesses, and they'll go through an entire thing. And whether or not that'll be a positive outcome for you will be determined by what human resources discovers. And I've seen it in both ways. Sometimes the boss truly is toxic and human resources does address it, or unfortunately I've seen it go south where the employee suddenly has a target on their back. So just use your judgment, trust your gut, and I would only do this in an absolute last resort. Of course, the last resort is if you feel like you might be wanting to quit your job as a result of it, because that would be a constructive discharge at that point in time where the employer is making it so uncomfortable for you that you're essentially being forced to leave. In a lot of cases, that can be illegal and can be considered a toxic workplace. And if you're to that point, you have nothing to lose by going into the human resources office and then addressing it before you leave. Furthermore, if it's really toxic and you feel like you're being unfairly targeted and you decide to exit the business, it may be worth talking to an employment attorney in your area to see what your options are. Now keep in mind, it's very hard to prove that you're in this situation, so keep really good notes and let the attorney determine what the best way is to help you. And to that end, nothing in this video should be construed as legal advice, because if you're truly in a toxic situation and you don't know what to do about it, a competent labor attorney can help you look at your options. And keep in mind that quitting your job is the absolute last resort and is not something that I generally recommend for people. Normally, we can work through a lot of these issues. It often is a communication problem that you have with your boss. But if it's truly bad, it might be time for you to update your resume and start to look for alternative employment opportunities. And the final thing I'd recommend is working on self-care. Take the time that you need to clear your head, spend time in nature, get away from the workplace as best you can, try to compartmentalize and leave it behind, and try to focus on other things that get your mind off of it. Because oftentimes doing things that help you reduce your stress can give you clarity on what you should do next in your situation. So don't underestimate the importance of self-preservation, self-care. But if you do find yourself looking for your next opportunity, that's actually something that I specialize in. I've got a website called alifeafterlayoff.com, and it's loaded with tips and tricks, all from a recruiting insider's perspective. I share my deepest and most intimate knowledge in the form of some training courses. The first one, and probably the most important for most active job seekers, is that resume. And we want to learn how to write our own resume because it's the most important document that you have in your career. And that's why I created a course called Resume Rocketfuel, which is designed to teach you exactly how to write a resume step by step. I take you through the entire process. You actually watch me write my own. I give you the template that I use, and it's a very robust course. But once you get your foot in the door to get that first round interview, then it's up to you to market yourself throughout the rest of the interviewing process. That's where the Ultimate Job Seeker Bootcamp comes in. We go through each round of the interview process, give you tips, techniques, and then ultimately hopefully get you to that job offer. Once you get to that job offer, we make sure that you don't leave a dime on the table. And of course, if you want to skip the recruiter altogether, that's the preferable method of getting into the interview process, and that's where unlocking LinkedIn comes in. So if you're not leveraging targeted networking, that's an absolute game changer for you. So check out that course as well. And if you're somebody that's really struggling with the toxic situation, I do offer some limited private one-on-one coaching. Again, it's not construed as legal advice, but I can give you a different perspective from human resources side and some strategy that you might want to apply in order to navigate it more successfully. Of course, you can reach me through my website for that. Anyway, hopefully this video was helpful and you're not dealing with a super toxic situation, but if you are, I'm here to help. Appreciate you watching. We'll see you on the next one.